Baltic states. It lies on a strategic part of NATO's territory on the border with Russia and Belarus.
This is just a drill, a training exercise, but the threat is real. Since Russia invaded Ukraine last year, NATO has ramped up its air policing along its eastern flank.
If you leave them all alone, unescorted, and we have civilian airliners flying the same airspace, then you could potentially have a mid-air collision.
When you have a bully in school, then the bully does not bully you when you have big friends. And this is the way NATO works.
If you can find one Polish citizen who agrees, I'll be glad to take that seriously. I mean, look, first of all, I never told them NATO wouldn't expand. I ran for president advocating the expansion of NATO in 1992. And I had a conversation with Boris Yeltsin, whom I respected very much, and who was a much better president than he got credit for, as we all now see. And I said, look, I don't think you're going to invade Eastern Europe, but you're not going to be there forever.
Our mission is clear: to demonstrate the seriousness of NATO's purpose so that the Serbian leaders understand the imperative of reversing course, to deter an even bloodier offensive against innocent civilians in Kosovo, and if necessary, to seriously damage the Serbian military's capacity to harm the people of Kosovo. In short, if President Milosevic will not make peace, we will limit his ability to make war.
Lithuania's border with Russian ally Belarus is fenced up with razor wire. NATO has turned Vilnius into a fortress, aiming to protect US President Joe Biden and other alliance leaders as they meet there next week.
This situation is really very tense because of aggression of Russian Federation against Ukraine. So it's already on a very, very high level.
Fundamental blunder that the United States made in the mid-'80s, late '80s, early '90s, was the expansion of NATO. I mean, here we'd won the Cold War. We'd won the Cold War. And you then had people saying, well, now what are we going to do with NATO? Oh, well, I don't know. It's a bureaucracy. It works. What are we going to do with it? And so then the idea of expanding NATO. And the problem with it is this. During the negotiation for the reunification of Germany, Gorbachev and Jim Baker says to Gorbachev, in the treaty it says, no NATO troops in what was then East Germany. In the discussions, and I had this conversation with Gorbachev last summer, he told me very directly, the conversation with Jim Baker, the question was, Baker saying, NATO, if you agree to reunification of Germany in NATO, NATO will not expand 1 inch further east.
There's a NATO summit next week. Have you made up your mind whether you will go?
Vilnius summit is very important. If there is no unity regarding the technical invitation for Ukraine to join the alliance, it's all a matter of political will, just to find the proper wording and invite Ukraine. It would be an important message to say that NATO is not afraid of Russia. Ukraine should get clear security guarantees while it is not in NATO. And that is a very important point. Only under these conditions our meeting would be meaningful. Otherwise, it's just another politics.
So it sounds unlikely that you will go.
Why?
Well, you heard it from the man himself. He may be going, he may not. I don't know. Alex Christoforou joins us, Alexander Mercouris, Cyrus Janssen, and I'm Alex from Reporterfy Media. Gentlemen, nice little intro there that should get us all pumped up for today's wonderful events in the beautiful city of Vilnius, Lithuania, the home from my wife. God rest her with the chaos that's going on there. Alex, you just put out a video a few minutes ago talking about this stuff on your channel. What's your thoughts for today's events, where we're going with the NATO and Vilnius?
Well, the big story is, of course, Sweden entering NATO, or Erdogan giving his okay for Sweden to begin the process to enter NATO. And the rest of the summit is just going to be more of of the same. If I have to give my opinion, there's going to be more weapons, more escalation. I believe Macron announced that he's going to be providing long-range missiles to Ukraine as well. And I imagine there's going to be a lot of bilateral agreements being signed and security guarantees being signed and a lot of handshaking around very big tables, a lot of smiles, a lot of photos. But it's basically what we've been seeing for the past year and a half, which is just formalizing the ongoing escalation, putting it on paper, money, weapons for as long as it takes, or at least for as long as the collective West can last. Because given Joe Biden's slip up the other day, they are running out of ammunition and weapons. So we are coming towards some sort of end. When that will be, I'm not quite sure, but I think we are getting closer and closer to the finality of all of this, because the West is just running out of everything.
Let's go to Alexander Mercouris. Alexander Mercouris, you can follow up with that. Also seen a lot of very active videos coming out of your channel, again, focusing on today's events in Lithuania. Give us your insight.
I think this is a summit meeting that is completely empty of ideas. I think that it was all expected that they would be holding it at a time when Ukraine would have achieved some major breakthroughs on the battlefronts. We saw all that energy and activity at the start of the year to supply Ukraine with tanks and infantry fighting vehicles and machines, and all kinds of complex plans were made for.
We'll just come back to Alex in a moment here. Just check his microphone out there, maybe his signal. Well, we're on the topic. Alex, just let us know when you're back. I think you're back. I think we're clear. Does he hear us?
Yes.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, let's carry on, Mr. Mercouris. Maybe not. Okay. If Alex could refresh his internet there, we can get him back on the screen. I'm just going to show you guys today what it looks like landing at the Vilnius airport. You're welcome to Lithuania, and on the runways of the beautiful airport in Lithuania, where I met my wife almost 20 years ago, you're greeted by the 104 Patriots surface-to-air missiles as you're landing in the lovely city of Vilnius when you arrive there today, as well as another side-angle shot of the beautiful green grass. I always enjoyed flying into that airport, but isn't that great to see Raytheon is actually sponsoring and welcoming you and enjoying your stay here in Lithuania. Okay, Alexander, I think we might have your connection ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, can I just say,
sorry about that.
In a sense, this appearance of these Patriot missiles and, the fact that Vilnius is apparently now largely a fortress, it tells you quite a lot about the state of mind, because this is a NATO alliance, which, as I said, is in a kind of a way a besieged alliance, because they were expecting, as I said, a big Ukrainian breakthrough by this point. This is what the whole activity and energy of the last couple of months was all about: supplying Ukraine with heavy weapons, with tanks, with infantry fighting vehicles, with guns, with shells, and all those sort of things. And there was going to be a breakthrough. Zelensky was going to be invited to Vilnius. There was going to be some sort of big move towards perhaps progressing towards eventual NATO membership. And it hasn't happened. Instead, what we have is the admission from Biden himself that the United States is out of shells. The first time I can think of when the United States has run out of shells in a modern war. I mean, that is an extraordinary fact in itself, and one which will echo around the world. I'm pretty sure that people in China, for example, have sat up and noticed that the United States cannot sustain even this kind of war any longer. So they come to Vilnius, and of course they have all of this equipment there, all these missiles, all these rockets, all of that. They're not seriously expecting an attack from the Russians. I mean, that is absurd. The purpose of all of these weapons is as psychology. It is to make them feel that despite everything going wrong around them, they are still strong. They have these weapons there. And also, of course, the weapons do something else. They remind them of the fact that ultimately they're all politicians, and the people who are paying their election expenses and their bills, they are the people who make these things and who expect that this war has to continue. So these weapon systems, they serve two roles. They are psychological reassurance at a time when the Ukraine project, is going visibly and disastrously wrong. Even the Western media sees this. And at the same time, they're a forceful reminder of who it is ultimately who pulls the strings in decision-making in the West.
Cyrus, let's bring you on the screen now. You and I focus a lot on China here. As of the last couple of days here, we're hearing over here, as well as the banter going up now, how we contain Russia, that's NATO, some of the people that we're speaking, but also going back to a 2019 statement where NATO claimed that they were not going to move into the South China Sea, but they had to address the fact that China is coming closer to us. Is this more of this, anti-China rhetoric coming out of, NATO to gain some support to maybe, corner Japan into doing something? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, good question, Alex. I think what's interesting is we keep hearing these news reports about a potential NATO office being set up in the Pacific, and certainly incorporating Japan. And there's been a lot of people that have started to push back on this. I think what's interesting is I know Macron from France has spoke out against this. And there has been many people very much speculating this. I know the vibe in China is one that is not really favorable of NATO. Certainly the fact that, we're looking at, we got to go back to the very beginning of what was the purpose of NATO, right? The NATO, I've talked to many Chinese people about this. And one of the facts that they always say is NATO was really formed to counter the USSR. And as soon as the Soviet Union fell, that should have been the abolishment of NATO. Of course, we look at, John Mearsheimer, obviously a well-known professor from the University of Chicago, who has been very much an advocate of NATO expansion, has certainly provoked Putin and certainly played a role in this invasion. I think what's interesting is, I think a lot of people in China are certainly watching very closely as, is NATO going to morph into the next phase? Is it going to really be about, containing Russia and then next containing China? And I think that's a very big issue that many people in China are certainly, watching. But I agree with the statements here so far. It's been very interesting being here in the United States and hearing about the spring offensive with Ukraine, and how, this is going to be a game changer and kind of flip the switch. Everything's going to change here. We just haven't seen really any of that, to be honest. So again, as you often say, I try to advocate for peace. It's, in my opinion, there's just no better time to get to the bargaining table and try to get a ceasefire and somewhat draw a conclusion to this, because I agree with Alex's statement of, as far as, what is the purpose of having Raytheon there and having these weapons there? It very much is to just, it's a flex. It's we want to flex our muscles. We want to show it. We want to show the world, NATO's going to come to Lithuania. Let's make sure we get all of our weapons here on case. I think Ukraine would have turned the corner here, but they haven't. And again, you feel for the people in Ukraine and the devastation of that country, but it's, something's got to give. There's got to be somewhere where we make some progress here, because if we continue down this road, are we just going to be locked into the next forever war? That's kind of my thoughts this morning.
Cyrus, I'm not going to give Vilnius, a get out of jail free card here. I had a look at some cables dating back as far as 2004 from Lithuania. And this seems to be a well-orchestrated little script. As you know, the European Union welcomed Lithuania back in the early 2000s, but also if you go back and you see some of the cables, and this is available, anybody that wants to go look for it, I will not show the source online due to, I guess, security reasons, but this has its dated, this one's dated, the first one's dated on 2004. Lithuania declares solidarity with Ukraine to propose a NATO role. Right there, almost 20 years ago. The Lithuanian parliament expressed its solidarity with the people of the Ukraine and its support for their democratic objectives in a vote of 123-1 with, 3 people saying, we're not going to vote on this. But that tells you there's the start. Then we fast forward to 2006, and it gets more interesting. Once again, free Assange, but thank you. If we go into more details on what these cables are talking about, this one is dated August 11th, 2006. Lithuanian PM pushes Ukraine Yanukovych on EU, NATO, WTO integration. And it talks about the prime minister of the country is talking about selling military arms, welcoming pressure from Lithuania to put more pressure for the Ukraine. It goes into really a lot of details. And this document here is about 5 pages. Then I'm going to go into the last part here where Ukraine's foreign minister to NATO give us, the MAP, the the membership action plan. And that, once again, is dated the 20th of November, 2008. So I'm going to go to Alex Christoforou on this. This has been in action for a couple of decades. Haven't we been have we been fooled here? I mean, as the average people just think that this conflict that's been happening with Russia just happened a couple of years ago. Your thoughts, Alex?
Most people believe that the conflict that is taking place right now started in February of 2022. Yes, absolutely. If you were to tell people about the Maidan 2014 and even the events before leading up to the Maidan, the majority of people in the collective West would not know what you're talking about. And the majority of people in the collective West would not want to hear it either. I think it would be too disruptive and too painful for them to understand what really happened in Ukraine and how a lot of this is connected to NATO. The whole conflict could have been avoided if Zelensky just said that Ukraine's not going to enter NATO. Was it that hard? Was it really that difficult for Ukraine to be neutral? Really? It's that tough for him to say, you know what, we're going to act as a bridge between Russia and the European Union, between the East and the West. We're gonna trade with Russia, our neighbor, of which our economy is already fully integrated with, of which we speak the same language. We have much of the same beliefs, religions, holidays. We're married with each other in many instances, and at the same time, we're going to look to do business with the European Union and the West. Because before this conflict started, right in between post-Maidan and up until the special military operation, the Russians came out with various statements saying, look, NATO is a red line, but if you guys want to pursue the European Union, maybe we can see this as some sort of opportunity so that, Ukraine can indeed act as some sort of bridge between us and the EU. But, the whole conflict stems from the fact that Zelensky refused to say that his country is going to remain neutral. That's it. But, and NATO is a business. It is a business. I refer to it as NATO Incorporated because their business model relies on weapons, like Alexander was stating. They have to show the weapons that are protecting them. They have to show the weapons manufacturers that are sponsoring them and funding them. So it relies on weapons, conflict, war, and expansion. It needs to expand. Well, it got Finland, it got Sweden. Okay, it'll go for Moldova. And then where does it go? It lost the big prize. The big prize was Ukraine. With Ukraine, it would have opened up all of the Caucasus and Eurasia and And absolutely, it would have been a springboard for Asia Pacific, for NATO Pacific in Asia. It has to expand, because if it doesn't expand, there's no purpose to the thing. There's no reason to have NATO. So, Ukraine is the defeat of NATO. NATO cannot expand anymore. It's hit that brick wall. And that's it. So now they're going to have to think of more creative ways. If they want to exist, they're going to have to think of more creative ways. And perhaps that's why they're kicking around the idea of a NATO Japan, an office, a subsidiary, a franchise in Asia.
So kind of like what I put on the screen there, we got NATO, or the NAPIATO, the North Atlantic, Pacific, Indian, and Arctic Treaty Organization. That's pretty much where it's going, right? when you think about it, if they want to expand. I also got some documents in front of me here about corruption. Annually, there is approximately $20 billion annual worldwide in corruption within the 30, now I believe 32 countries. That's a staggering amount of money just in corruption. So quite mind-blowing. We're going to go to Alexander Mercouris, then back over to Cyrus. Alexander, you want to add some words to what Mr. Christoforou was saying?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the first thing to say about this is, of course, you've read all these documents in the early 2000s, basically telling the Ukrainians, go ahead. This is from Lithuania. You must go ahead, push forward, enter NATO. Of course, at that time, and for at least a decade beyond that, opinion polls in Ukraine showed a very large majority of people in Ukraine did not want to join NATO. This was an idea imposed upon Ukraine largely from outside. Yes, there were some people in Western Ukraine, bitterly anti-Russian, who basically wanted to become part of NATO, but they were very far from being the majority. And yet this issue of NATO membership was continuously and relentlessly pushed onto them, with the results that we see. And you said when one shouldn't leave, acquit Lithuania of its role. Lithuania has played a huge role in this. And Lithuania, incredibly and bizarrely, is now also leading the charge. It's a small Baltic country, about 3 million people, is leading the charge in pushing NATO to confront China. It's actually published, as I understand it, a Pacific strategy. Lithuania has published a Pacific strategy. I believe it's 16 pages long. It says that its economic priority is to enhance relations with Taiwan. I mean, this is all very bizarre and very strange. And I can't help but think that to some extent, it's partly that Lithuania is acting as an outlier for certain rather frightening people in Washington who want to push NATO increasingly into a confrontation with China as well. You know, the confrontation with Russia isn't going well, so we have to now pivot towards a confrontation with China too. And of course, it's this fundamental mistake that the Baltic countries are making, which is that they have, ever since the Soviet Union collapsed, work themselves up into a state where they say to themselves, we have got to somehow get the US to defend us against the Russian bear, because if we don't, the Russian bear will come along and will swallow us up. And of course, they go even further. Some of them talk about breaking up Russia, doing all of these terrible things, forcing Ukraine to join NATO, weaken Russia in every conceivable way. And of course, that is a very dangerous strategy, because ultimately, the United States is a faraway country. It's, you have to go past Europe, across the Atlantic before you reach the United States. And the United States is a country with global interests, lots of responsibilities in many parts of the world. And of course, it's a country with many, many problems. It might not be there forever in the Baltic region. And what could happen eventually is that the United States, for whatever reason, has to pull back from the Baltic, from this area, at which point Lithuania and the other Baltic states will be left with an antagonized and hostile Russia, a Russia that has learnt to see them as antagonistic and hostile to itself. there on their doorstep. And then what do? Their correct policy, their right policy right from the outset was to pursue good relations with Russia, not these catastrophically bad relations that they have now.
Cyrus, I'm going to let you jump in and address the point where it's like a boomerang. It comes all the way back around to Taiwan again. After you're done with that point, I've got a real barn burner to follow up with Mr. Mercouris on his statements about the Baltics. I'm not in a good mood with the Baltics right now. So over to you, Cyrus. Let's talk about this Taiwan issue again.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting, I don't know if everybody saw that report that came out yesterday that said it was just absolutely comical. I mean, it said that, you know, Taiwan should look at Ukraine as a model, you know, essentially a model for future success. And I mean, if this is, I'm absolutely just kind of shell shocked that someone would kind of think of that headline and then they would actually write that column and then they would send it to an editor and he would think, wow, that's actually really good. Let's publish that. And then someone would push publish on that. And that's where we are right now. I mean, if I'm Taiwan, that's the last country that I would be looking at for a model of success. I mean, it's not proven successful. And I think what's happening is that, you know, unfortunately, you know, when we talk about the Taiwan situation very clearly, there is a tremendous amount of people in Taiwan, and I'm not saying that they want to be with China, but they certainly don't want to be independent either. And it's almost, you know, they're dangerously creeping towards a proxy war with China and the United States and being caught in the middle of something that they don't want. And if you actually go to Taiwan and you speak with Taiwanese people, you know, that is the overall sentiment, is that obviously they're very much anti-war. They've essentially have been living in peace for a long time. They want to have a relationship with China because many people don't realize that, you know, Xi Jinping spent 19 years serving in the Fujian province, which is right across the strait. And he was a huge advocate of increasing the relationship between Taiwan and mainland. And you know, that is a huge part of the business that goes on in Taiwan. That's, you know, we always hear about this vibrant economy, you know, in Taiwan. Well, the big part of that is because of their relationship with China and how that has increased tremendously over the past few decades. So again, I think for, you know, Taiwan, they should be absolutely, you know, very concerned and looking at the situation very clear. But they need better leadership because unfortunately, you know, we've seen some of these Western politicians, you know, they're getting paid. I mean, they get paid, they go over and give a 30-minute speech like Michael Pompeo, get paid $300,000 for 30 minutes, you know, just to kind of spew some nonsense that doesn't really accomplish anything. You know, it really just agitates a lot of people. There's a tremendous amount of protest that go on outside of his hotel. Many people speaking against that. Of course, that is censored. Many people don't see that. And so it's really very much a concern because, you know, we're seeing, you know, and I like what Alex said is that, you know, NATO has to expand, right? Or else it loses relevancy. You know, if it appears that it has hit this brick wall. So they're trying to get creative. You know, it's like, how do we, you know, let's look out east. Let's look to the Far East. You know, how do we expand even further and get involved? But it is sad when you start looking at all of these companies involved, like the Raytheons and these think tanks and all of the weapon manufacturers. I mean, unfortunately, that at the end of the day, that is the MO of the United States government. I mean, we're run by the military-industrial complex, as all of us do know, and that's why. I mean, it's interesting when we talk about politics in the United States. It really doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat. I've kind of realized that since moving back here, because that is the heartbeat of this country, is the military-industrial complex. And at the end of the day, I mean, that serves both Republicans and Democrats. So that's kind of the beat that the United States marches to, and you know, it's something that we need better education on, you know, here on the ground level in the United States, because people are we have no clue what goes on outside of these borders. It is just shocking how our government really runs this country and uses our tax dollars, and 99% of Americans are completely oblivious to what's going on outside of this country, rather.
Well, thanks for that insight, Cyrus. Yeah, I want to get right into this. I got a problem here with Estonia, a big problem. The hypocrisy of even their current prime minister, Kaja Kallas. I'm not sure if I pronounced that the correct way. Well, there's your poster child that I would say that she is the cheerleader to, you know, calling NATO, and I think Alex Christoforou was quite polite, calling it a corporation. I almost call it almost like a terrorist organization. This woman here, and let me give you some feedback on this lady, okay? She's been in power since 2021, has the audacity to talk and divide her country, which is made up of 25% of ethnic speaking Russians in her country, okay? The other thing that maybe she should address is the following, which I'm going to put on screen here. This is, yes, this is not 1950, 1960. This is 2023, everyone. This is a Estonian, Republic of Estonian alien's passport. Now, what does that mean? We call that a gray passport. There are approximately 90,000 of those still in existence. So what does the current and prior prime ministers of the country say? When the Soviet Union collapsed, Estonia was one of the first countries that claimed independence, but they brought in quickly a law that says you cannot have dual nationality, period. And that was pretty much a strike against Russia, okay? Because a lot of these people had passports, but you got to remember, outside of the Soviet Union, or pardon me, outside of Russia, you know, there's all these little Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of these people were displaced, some from Siberia. I believe my wife's stepfather is from Siberia. Now, imagine that being given a choice where, let's say all your relatives are in Siberia and you just got caught out or had a family in Estonia at the time, and you were told, you know what? Before you're going to get the Estonian passport, you got to give up your Russian one. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So here, these are the exact words from the Prime Minister in Estonia in 2017. I do not approve of automatically granting Estonian citizenship to people with undetermined citizenship. Well, that's quite racist, if you ask me. According to an integration study from 2017, 45% of these people with undetermined citizenship do not wish to acquire Estonian citizenship or not that sure about their wishes. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, there's still 90,000 of these people in that country that are being told, get an EU passport, become Estonian, learn the language. It says it right in the forms. Well, we'll pay for the language. So let me get this straight. You're going to, against people's wishes, bring in a law that makes it that you can't have two nationalities. Same with my wife. She can't become a Canadian. If she becomes a Canadian, she has to give up her Lithuanian passport. This all comes along the lines of this real anti-Russian rhetoric. Okay, and then you have, again, I'm going to carry on a little bit more. I put her lovely photo up here for everybody to kind of have a little look and see what her face would look like on the alien's passport. Now, here's the important part about these passports. Sure, Estonia will let you live in the country, even if it was one of your relatives of the 27 million Soviet people that died in the Second World War. Well, unfortunately, you are not allowed to travel in most EU countries. Technically, you are stateless. And that's where they stand on it. They do not allow visa entry holders of these Estonian alien, just to see that in one sentence, alien Estonian passport. 90,000 of these people are pretty much put out into the cold by a country that is forcing them to give up their nationality. If that is not a firecracker for a potential future conflict, I don't know what is. And we see here, they do not approve of automatically granting Estonian citizenship. It goes into more details about it. Yes, they will allow the new kids that are born in the country, but the babushkas and all those people, you're SOL, shit out of luck on that one. And this lady just gets on there and says, yeah, Russians are bad, Russians are bad, Russians are bad, yet she has 25% of her population which are Russians. Absolutely disgraceful to see something like that go on in 2023. This is real. Research it for yourself. These are called gray passports. You know, the humiliation continues, and the arrogance of these leaders to run the terrorist organization of NATO is just shocking. Anybody want to chime in?
Well, I mean, this is absolutely correct. And I mean, it's been a long-running scandal. It goes all the way back, as you correctly said, to the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's bad in Estonia. It's bad in Latvia. The important thing to understand, though, one knows all about ethnic hostilities, discriminatory policies, all of that kind of thing. But these countries are also members of the European Union. And the European Union, like the rest of the West, claims to be against all of this. And Estonia and Latvia, Lithuania is less, I think, involved because there were fewer Russians there to start with. But Estonia and Latvia are never criticized over this in the West. It barely gets reported. In fact, it doesn't get reported here. The EU institutions, who will come down on any country like a ton of bricks if it doesn't take in immigrants and all kinds of things of this kind of refugees from the Arab world or whatever, they are completely not interested in this issue. In fact, they're supportive of the Estonians and the Latvians. And on top of all of that, I can say this: the European Court of Justice and the European Court of Human Rights, to whom applications have been made, they have completely failed themselves over these issues. They've all collectively, the entire collective West, has gone along with these terrible policies. And that tells you, first, of course, about the kind of countries that Estonia and Latvia have become, which is terrible. It's terrible for those countries. I mean, to be led and run and operate in that kind of way, creating divisions, creating hostility with Russians, antagonizing part of your own population, refusing to work and exist as part of your neighborhood on good terms with your neighbors. That is a very bad thing. It creates, obviously, tension, fear, paranoia, all we see, which all the time we get from Baltic governments. But it is also exposes to an extreme level the hostility of the West and that hostility towards Russia, because Russians are being singled out for this. And even if it is not a big issue in the West, of course, it is something that Russians themselves talk about. So when Russians hear West talking always about human rights, about discrimination, about those kind of things, well, they see what happens at the Baltic states, countries within the European Union, parts of the collective West, and they know that, in fact, the West doesn't mean what it says and that it's got a beef against Russians.
Alexander, I just think, after reading that and just absorbing it again for about the 5th time this week, I went over it carefully, and I am still shocked that, first of all, a country like Lithuania, it doesn't surprise me now. Actually, it doesn't surprise me with the dingbat that's, the prime minister in that country. But to me, to see that happen and to see, that many people, we're not talking 200-300, we're talking 90,000 stateless people here. I think we all know very well, for them refusing, even in today's day and age, to take an Estonian passport, I think we know where their commitment to a passport lands, and that's with Russia. The interesting point, though, and I'm going to pass this over to Alex Christoforou, and I hope you don't mind answering this question, but if you have that many people in the country that you haven't figured out and made them stateless, and then throw on top of that, more complications for them just even being Russian as a minority in that country, isn't that going to potentially start what could be potentially Ukraine 2.0 in that part of the country, in Estonia? Is that a possibility?
When it comes to Russia and Russophobia, anything goes. So, I mean, it's accepted to do this to Russians. It's accepted to have Russians carry a great passport. It's accepted to make fun of Russians in cinema, to villainize them. I guess to the same extent as we see with Chinese as well. I mean, this is it's okay to do these things because they're Russian. That's just the way the West is operating at this moment. Maybe in 5 years' time, it'll be a different country and a different ethnic group. And before the Russians, it was someone else. It was Iraq, or it was Syria, or I don't know. This is just par for the course. And Estonia can get away with these things in part because you're talking about Russians. So when it comes to Russians, You can absolutely do this to Russian speakers or to Russian people of the Russian culture or Russian Orthodox believers, whatever it is. This is accepted. For the EU, this is absolutely accepted. The problem that Estonia and the Baltic nations are going to have is it goes back to your opening clip, Alex, where Kaja Kallas was talking about how it's so nice to be a small country, but to have this really big protector against the bully. Well, you know, the big protector, the US, is not going to be there forever. The EU will collapse, and the EU is collapsing very quickly. NATO will collapse. Russia's been around for 1,000 plus years and still going. Sooner or later, the US is not going to be there to protect the Baltic nations. The EU is going to be a footnote in history, as will NATO. And then the Baltic nations are going to have a very, very big problem. A very big problem. And they're going to have to actually use diplomacy and common sense and figure out a way to get along with their much bigger, more powerful neighbor who is not going anywhere. Russia has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's going to remain for hundreds and hundreds of years. And the Baltic nations better find a way to get along with their neighbor. God forbid they find a way to have good relations with their neighbor and trade and have tourism and make money and prosper and thrive. God forbid we have any of that. It's much better to have military bases from a country that's located 100,000 miles away. I'm exaggerating, but I think everyone in the chat knows what I mean. Anyway, those are my thoughts. And Kaja Kallas, by the way, you know, she's just one of many of these collective West leaders that they spit out from some WEF Klaus Schwab assembly line. They're all the same. They're all interchangeable. If it's not Kaja Kallas in Estonia, it's Justin Trudeau, or it's Mark Rutte, or it's Macron. You can switch them around. You can move them around, switch them around. They're all the same person.
I mean, Alex, to add to that, and you're saying, it's like a cookie cutter for these politicians. Cyrus, I mean, we see that Lithuania has got into a bit of hot water here with China. But, my years that I spent in Lithuania back in the early 2000s for a couple of years, you could feel at first they were so proud to have George Bush stand out in the middle of the city talking to this small little Baltic nation, and they ate it up. And then we noticed around 2003-04, the NGOs started to come in and really, lay the fabric for EU, NATO, the WTO, getting involved in all these trade agreements. But where do we stand here with, China now? Lithuania has ruffled the feathers with, China's Taiwan. I mean, is this the start? Or are we getting ready again for now the next prelude? Because they're not going to make it with Russia. I mean, your coverage, Alex Christoforou and Alexander Mercouris, is exceptionally amazing. But I'm just saying that now I think there could eventually be a pivot here, and China could be in, the headlights. Cyrus, your thoughts are we going to be marching out of Ukraine, NATO mission, and all eyes focused here quickly on Taiwan?
I mean, that's definitely the pathway that seems most obvious that the United States government wants to go. I mean, I was reading another foreign policy article probably about a month ago, and it said, the United States goal for China should be democracy. That's what we need to be focusing on right now. And it's kind of stunning because I was listening to another podcast last night that's actually from a very well-known economist from the London School of Business named Ke Yujin. She's phenomenal. She has a lot of great insights. She's just recently written a book about this. And one of the key insights is that she said is, when you look at she was born in China, she's Chinese. And she said, when you look at what's happening in China right now and how the country is evolving, it's not to say that, democracy might not come to China at some day, but it has to come from within. And at the time, Chinese youth are not looking out and saying, wow, this is exactly what we want. I think my screen just went out.
No problem. Keep going. I think maybe your battery or something. We can hear you.
Hold on. It's back to, My battery did go out. There we go. Switch
No
to
worries.
the other one.
Well
There we
done.
go.
Great.
Quick pivot here.
Yeah.
No, what was interesting is that she said, young Chinese youth are not looking out and seeing a very clear alternative, right? We look at the chaos that's ensuing in France right now. We look at Germany and how their economy has been hammered by, essentially following the lines of the United States. I mean, we look at the U.S. and that political instability. There's not a clear model, a political model that Chinese youth are saying, wow, this is the route that we want to go. But of course, we know, I mean, we have, these Western politicians that continue to virtue signal, and so many of them they want to talk about all of these different rights, and at the end of the day they really miss the main point that's happening in China, and that is the fact that the Chinese are very proud of their country. They're very determined to keep going forward. They have changed in many ways over the last few decades. But I think what we want to see is we're certainly seeing the United States being set up that in their world, they want to take out Russia. They want to take out Putin. I mean, that's absolutely the goal of the United States government. It's very clear. I think I mentioned this in maybe a potential live stream that we did before is, here where I am in the United States, we have a lot of Air Force bases and Navy bases close to me. I know a lot of people that work there, and everybody's just like, this is best case scenario for the United States. We get to take on Russia. We get to take, our goal is to take out Putin. We're not risking U.S. lives. We can spend our military budget because, when we're in times of conflict, we can just keep raising that budget. Now it's over $1 trillion a year. We can keep push. And the interesting thing that many people don't realize is that, when we go to China now, we're basically already using Taiwan. We've used Taiwan to increase that military budget in the United States. This whole entire timeline of China is going to invade Taiwan before 2025. There has not been one single reference from China's side stating that 2025. In fact, if you actually listen to Xi Jinping, he was saying, we need to prepare our military and we need to gain stronger. And, we have a lot of work to do to keep growing our military. Now, if you listen to that, that would imply that, China is not ready to even do an invasion if they were to do that. But of course, it's the United States policymakers that are beating these drums. And it was the United States general who actually was the first to say that 2025. He said that right before the budget meeting was finalized in order to push through an increased budget because, guess what? China's going to invade Taiwan. Let's go ahead and increase that budget so we can spend more military, so we can, have more defense contractors like, Raytheon and get them on the ground and things like that. So there's always a lot more that needs to be seen behind the scenes. And it's the same thing. I mean, interesting enough, I went to CNN just now just to kind of see what the headlines are. And, it's why I think shows like this and listening to Alex and Alexander are so important, because there's a lot more nuance that needs to be reported here. I mean, here on CNN, for example, it's Putin seems less able to grasp the challenges before him. Russian senior commander's been killed. Biden and NATO leaders enter the summit with a show of force. So again, to the average American that just logs into CNN, it's like, oh, okay, wow, we're doing really good. Like, this is going great here. And, looks like Biden's winning this, and Turkey's move is a huge win for Biden and a massive blow to Putin. It's inevitable. Russia's going to lose this war any second. But of course, exactly like we heard with the spring offensive, we need to kind of peel back the layers and understand what's really going on the ground there. And again, it's almost like, okay, the spring offensive didn't do really well. Let's go ahead and pivot. Let's go to the next storyline that we can sell to kind of make sure that everyone's on board here. So that's kind of my opinions on everything. But yeah, to kind of circle back to the opening question, I definitely see, China's going to it's going to only continue this conflict. The tensions are only continuing to wrap up. But there is some sign. I mean, there is some positive signs. Janet Yellen came back from her trip to Beijing, and she said, she is very much a dove in the United States government, and said, the world is big enough for China and the United States to exist together. And, we should be working for that. And, when you do listen to some of the most influential businessmen that, and women in this country that really understand the global economy, these are very similar sentiments that they're also saying.
I think we're in a impossible U-turn situation here. We're starting to see a lot of banks in Russia. I was just speaking with somebody over the weekend, I was curious about their banking industry. And they said, well, yeah, the Chinese banks are moving in quite actively right now. And they're providing a lot of good services, mortgages, credit cards, and And this is quite interesting because we have this, we'll call it as you guys call it, the sanction escalator. I mean, it hasn't really affected Russia, period. And its citizens are saying, well, wait a minute, okay, no more Big Macs, fine. No more Starbucks, fine. And, no more, we'll call it, Western banks in, Citibanks and all these, Deutsche Bank, some German banks there. See you guys later. We'll move our money over to these Russian banks, and we'll be happily a customer of, the latest one was the Russian Agriculture Bank of China. I mean, opened its doors, many new locations. I mean, I think we are seeing the start here of, an absolutely impossible U-turn. Gentlemen, anyone want to take it?
No, absolutely. I mean, can I just say about this? I mean, the catastrophic miscalculation that was made right at the start of this conflict was the underestimation of the strength and size and diversity and complexity and sophistication of the Russian economy. I think a lot of people in the West really bought into this idea that it was, the size of Italy or the Netherlands or Texas or the Galapagos Islands. That it was, the gas station masquerading as the country. A lot of the predicate behind Western policy at the start of this conflict was based on the theory that Russia would collapse fast, that it would not be able to sustain the war. And this isn't new. I mean, if you go back, you read, you had that clip from Bill Clinton back in 1999 about, preventing, Milosevic from conducting his war, cutting off their ability to wage war, all that kind. It's a kind of thing that Americans, Westerners, often bring up. And they thought that this is what they would do. They'd sanction Russia. Russia's economy would collapse. The Russians wouldn't be able to sustain combat in Ukraine. Of course, the opposite has happened. To the economy itself, for the Russian economy, the sanctions have been galvanizing. They've opened spaces for Russian businesses. And they've also forced the Russians to start to address structural problems in their economy, which they'd papered over because they were so committed to trying to find solutions in trade with the West. So the result is we're now perhaps in the first period of not just growth. The Russian economy is now growing quite strongly, but perhaps even conceivably a type of boom. And the other thing that, of course, has happened is that Russia's economy has pivoted, and I think much faster than many people expected, from the West to the East, something which the Russians themselves were very reluctant to do because, of course, they thought of themselves as Europeans. The whole policy ever since Peter the Great's time, even before, was to integrate with Europe. They assumed that doing business with Europe was the best market, the best place for good products. China was somehow inferior. They've now pivoted to China and discovered it's not actually inferior at all. It's actually a pretty good place to do business with. And there's been this huge sea change in attitudes, and they discovered something else. In China, they're welcome, they're treated as friends, whereas, of course, in Europe, well, we see what happens. You've discussed the situation with the Baltic states, the discrimination against Russians there, and the way in which, as Alex correctly said, this is part of a pattern right across Europe. So I think this is lasting. If there was a peace agreement tomorrow, if all the sanctions were lifted tomorrow, still the Russians would continue on the course that they have now taken, because they realized that it's actually working out better for them than the old relationship with the West, which was to a great extent keeping them down. So this has been a massive failure, a colossal own goal. The Chinese, I should say, have handled this whole situation with great skill. They've been very careful, not to just barge in and act as the people with the deep pockets and things of that kind. And as I said, I think this is something that is going to shape the future, because the West didn't expect it, and the Russians themselves are astonished by.
This question's for Alex Christoforou. I really do enjoy your commentary every morning or afternoon because we have quite a bit of time change, and I always wait to hear what you've got to say. But the hide-and-seek game that the Turkish president, Erdogan, I mean, how many times is he going to be able to get away with what he has recently done? You mentioned in your video that they handed over 5 high-level military people just recently. Can you maybe give the audience the insight on that blunder? I think it's a very important piece of news because, you know, that's where, you know, Europe meets Asia. And when we have a guy like that making, well, I'm passing it over to you. You can explain to the audience.
Well, you know, Erdogan is going to do what Erdogan does, and he plays this game. He plays this game between Russia, the East, and Europe and the West. And you know, I think it was a bit of a surprise when the news did come out that he was going to hand over these 5 Azov commanders to Zelensky. And you know, it was a surprise. I wasn't expecting anything like that after they had their meeting, but you know, Erdogan, he had I believe he had a goal to provide something to the United States at the Vilnius summit, and he was working towards that goal. And it was starting with the commanders that he released, and eventually it ended up with the capitulation, with the acceptance of Sweden as a member of NATO. And I believe that this did please NATO and the United States very much. I mean, you know, this is a great PR victory for them at a time when things are going very, very badly for Ukraine and for NATO. As Alexander said, they were hoping that they were going to have this big counteroffensive victory party in Vilnius. They didn't get that. So in comes Erdogan to the rescue, and he provides them a type of media PR win. Sweden is now a part of NATO. Zelensky got to do his Azov Nazi heroes parade in Lviv. And Erdogan, being Erdogan, he asks for his take on for his cut of this deal, and it looks like he's going to resolve this F-16s issue that he's had with the United States for some time now. It looks like he's going to get promises about Turkey's accession into the EU, though we're just talking about promises. Some sort of visa liberalization, some sort of custom union agreement, or a revamp of the custom union that he has with Europe, more investment into Turkey. Turkey's economy is in a very poor state. So I think Erdogan, you know, being Erdogan and understanding his nature, he looked at the situation and he said, you know, I can take a hit on my relationship with Russia, and I know over time I can find my way back with Putin, because Putin will talk to me. He's not going to slam the door on Turkey just yet, and eventually I can work it out with Turkey, but with Russia. But for now, let me give the U.S. and the collective West something that they want, and they can give me something that I need: money, investment, F-16 parts, visa travel for Turkish citizens. And I think he looked at everything and he saw the situation and said, I'll go this way. I'll pivot towards the West for now. And in a month or two, after the Lithuania Vilnius hysteria NATO summit dies down, I can contact Putin and get back on good terms, at least short term good terms with Russia. So I think that's what Erdogan did. And you know, this is what Erdogan does. Consistently, continuously.
Yeah, I mean, he plays quite the game, this guy. I mean, I can never figure it out. I'm going to come over to you in a moment, Cyrus, because I need your insight on it. I just wanted to bring up something else that I was discovered when I was going through my notes here. And thank you again to Julian Assange for his in-depth reports that allows us to come up with this information. There's a company that used to be called Stratford. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it. it did a name change here a couple of years ago and sold itself to a company called Rain Corporation. Now, this has quite some interesting read. George Friedman, he's a Hungarian-born U.S. geopolitical author on the internal affairs. Now, his whole gig here is to hire people to do research that can help governments, I would say, quote unquote, destabilize certain regions in the world. Well, I went back, I paid my little fee because you can buy them on the website, and came out with a nice juicy 45 pager here of, political strategies. So it's like this. If you're Zelensky and you know you're in trouble, you just dial up to these boys. They're going to give you a nice glossy 50 pager and say, follow it. And this is very shocking and how detailed this document is. This one was looking at, this one's dated 2010, talking about Viktor Yanukovych. It goes through all the details, point by point, how big the military is, who's involved, who is, not really loyal to him, how to destabilize the country, where are most of the arms. And basically, if you want to destabilize a country or get it involved or get the attention of NATO, well, this is the script. And these are the boys that offer it. I mean, to me, this goes beyond NATO. I mean, there's probably these guys sitting in, the cafe of the Radisson in the middle of Vilnius right now, laughing while they're drinking tea, saying, hey, they bought it. Somebody followed our script to the T. And this really is quite bothersome because if countries like that, and I'm going to pick on the Baltic, this is pick on the Baltic days for me here, because these countries, you got to remember when they came out of the Soviet Union, they were quite desperate. And who comes along? The Americans come along, the European comes along, and they sell them all this beautiful dreams that things are going to be amazing. Don't worry, get into our currency. It's more stable. I mean, that's the worst thing that could have happened to some of these Baltic countries. And now they're, front line and center being, they'll be the first. If Russia had to flex its muscle outside of the borders now, they would be the first to fall in a heartbeat. I'm not sure if anybody wants to, follow me after that, but the more I dig on this, I mean, this is a huge, huge business.
Well, can I just say quickly two things? First of all, I think the Baltics are going to find themselves very exposed very soon. If we have a situation where the Ukraine war ends in a debacle, and in a clear-cut defeat for NATO and for the United States and for the West, then the Baltics immediately become frontline states, and they become frontline states following a defeat in which they were a part, of which they are themselves a part. So it already begins to look vulnerable. And I suspect also, and this isn't going to just be the Baltics, I think right across Eastern Europe, if the United States, if NATO visibly fails in Ukraine, inevitably there's going to be people in Poland, in Romania, in Bulgaria especially, in other places who are going to say to themselves, well, how reliable actually is that US guarantee? They weren't able to succeed in Ukraine. Ukraine was a big country and a powerful military. We are smaller countries. In the case of the Baltics, we have virtually no militaries at all. So you can expect a major frisson and an awful lot of fear starting to develop. And that might, of course, create all kinds of problems of its own. And going back to your earlier statement, Alex, when you said about the fact that this might be the next crisis point, it would not surprise me. I mean, it's not a crisis that the Russians are looking for. But if there's an issue with, Russian people in the Baltic states, and you can see how it might be, the tensions that might arise, well, who knows what might happen. But all those things that you've been talking about, all these things about all of these, I remember Stratfor very well. I used to sign up to them. I used to get some of their reports, by the way, long ago. I gave up on that ages ago. I mean, this whole industry of color revolutions, regime change, disinformation, because the people who do all the disinformation industry are part of the same industry. I mean, this has mushroomed to a disastrous extent right across the West now. And of course, they are a very, very powerful lobby. And you have to understand that they are also getting an awful lot of funding for what they do. And these people make money out of this kind of thing. And we used to speculate, Alex and I, on the Duran, that all that money that was going into Afghanistan, it used to go into all of these same organizations, the NGOs, all of these things. It went to them in Afghanistan and it went out of them and it found its way back to places like Ukraine and Baltic states and the Balkans and the Middle East. And we have a situation where, in effect, whole policies are decided in this extremely opaque way by these very shady people who now have a great deal of power and a great deal of influence. And it's very dangerous. It makes policy making extremely difficult because political decisions are not being made any longer by conventional politicians who get elected, but by this strange world of bureaucracies in Brussels, NGOs, informal structures, all of which have this enormous influence and who, by the way, also feed into the media.
Cyrus, I mean, your recent trip here to China, did you feel, I follow your Twitter account quite a bit. And just to see, some of the comments that people, even though you're on the ground here, you're in China, you're walking the streets, they're saying, well, no, that's not what the streets look like. No, that's not how Chinese people think. No, that's not what people in China think of their government. No, that's not. I mean, you see it so many times. You're walking there. I think we were even live at one point there in China, where people continued to say, well, we know you guys are there and you've been there for a while, but we still don't believe what's going on there. The Americans say that, Taiwan is, going to be, taken over. I mean, your thoughts on how this problem here with NATO could spill over to, China, and how are we going to deal with that? Because I feel that, the Americans are getting very desperate here. And this is what I fear the most. Whenever they get really, really desperate, they do something crazy. Bill Clinton, we have to remember the first NATO led, I'm going to call it an invasion into Yugoslavia that ended in 78 days of, aerial bombardment, which they walked away from. They do crazy things. It wouldn't surprise me if mistakes happen over here. We've had it many times. I've seen you do a lot of videos on this, so I want your insight, maybe to the audience. To are we cool over here, or are we're sitting ducks? What's your thoughts?
Well, I think it's a very different scenario because of how intertwined the U.S. and Chinese economies are. I mean, I think that there is. For example, I mean, we can take on Russia, and we can, for example, like I've mentioned before, I think it's very clear from the United States that they want regime change in Russia. They want to see Putin done. They want to. They'll take any. Russia's not a very important link to the United States as far as the U.S. economy, right? We can pull out our companies, and I actually shared this on Twitter last night. I mean, they even had the Raytheon CEO who said, "Look, as soon as Russia, this latest invasion." We pulled out our U.S. companies, we pulled out our U.S. citizens, we pulled out everything. We can immediately flip a switch and we can pull out of Russia. We can't do that with China. It's absolutely impossible. And I think that's what people really need to realize between this U.S.-China relationship, and why I do remain optimistic and have some hope for the future is because you can't really realistically, there's no chance for the United States to decouple from China. Now, we can de-risk, and we can certainly have other options for, some supply chains, but it's not like we can completely remove ourselves from China without completely damaging the United States economy. So there's going to be some backlash there amongst the American public, because if we, basically shoot ourselves in the own foot and say, look, no matter what it costs, we are going to, pull everything out of China. Well, that's going to cost a tremendous amount of pain for United States citizens, and it's going to absolutely crush our own economy. So you're going to get a ton of bad feedback on that, and there, many Americans are not going to stand for that. So I think, I think, Alex, it was important. I mean, you and I met in Shanghai. You and I walked down the Bund. We had a 30-minute video where we just put out, where it was basically unedited. I mean, it was simply a walk and talk. And what was amazing was, in the middle of that video, there was a Muslim couple that were walking behind us. And I mean, we've had comments like, well, I'm sure the Chinese government must have arranged that Muslim people to just casually drop in right behind Alex and Cyrus. I mean, and it was amazing because obviously you and I were completely oblivious to that until we went back and looked at the footage. The Bund doesn't have that many people. I'm sure that, those are hired actors. Really, there got to be 10,000 people, that were walking amongst right there. I mean, there's no way that we could have, coordinated that. But again, it does provide. I think it's some interesting nuance. I mean, we do see a tremendous amount of propaganda from other YouTubers as well that come out and make all of these bold claims about China that are just completely off the rails. I mean, there was a video talking about China's EV industry and how there's all of these deserted, EV cars everywhere. And the YouTuber that made this claim, his entire B-roll was gasoline cars, and it was actually another YouTube channel that came out and said, look, if you actually look at the footage, even their B-roll and their videos are gasoline cars. I mean, quite amazing that these China experts, can't even decipher between a gasoline and electric car and, really have no clue what they're talking about. So again, I think that's just an important thing why, again, all of this. I mean, I'm not the most educated on this situation with, for example, Lithuania and Russia and these all of these situations. Hence why I like to tune into these live streams and listen to Alexander and Alex as well. I learn a lot from these gentlemen, and there's always much more to the story because again, when you go to CNN.com, you're going to be presented what the U.S. government wants you to understand. And so that's the picture. That's one half of the story. And often, as we know, I mean, China, Russia, there's a lot more complex issues that need to be understood and a lot more nuances. And so again, I think as far as China, I do think I'm going to stay positive in the sense of I just know from a business perspective. And again, I've been back in the United States for a year now, and I've actually been quite amazed because I've spoken to so many successful businessmen. And it's amazing to see how, a lot of the wealth that's created inside of America is really through these boring businesses, right? It's like, for example, I manufactured this product. Oh, I manufactured this. I manufactured that. Oh, by the way, where do you manufacture that? Oh, we do it all in China. I mean, it'd be impossible to manufacture here in the United States, and the quality's just too good in China. The labor's just too, the price point just works out. And yeah, we've been manufacturing in China for 20 years. I mean, it's basically the lifeline of our company. Oh, great to know. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that insight for me. So again, it's really a lot of we tend to, and this is the dangerous thing about politics, I think, in the United States, is we tend to go so much on just emotion, and we try to evoke this fear, and unfortunately the masses who aren't business owners, who are just working paycheck to paycheck, they don't understand more about that. But once you get up to more successful businessmen and who really have traveled the world and understand things, there's a different story that's being told here in America.
Cyrus, I'm going to keep you on here because I got one question I want to ask you.
Yeah.
While I was in Shanghai there, I was meeting a lot of, in Chongqing, we didn't see a lot of foreigners here. In Shanghai, they're everywhere. And they were coming in by the plane loads there. And some of these were people who are arriving for China for the first time. I met some architects from Germany, and they're like, this is amazing. These are buildings that we want to always build. There's no budget for it in Europe, and there's no desire of, maybe being, a little bit, we'll say, creative when it comes to building, because China does have some creative buildings as well.
Sure.
But to see that energy, and these guys were in their, mid 40s, mid 50s, coming to China for the first time, and they're like, wow, this is amazing. And I was like, oh, how long are you guys here? Oh, we're going to extend our stay. Things are going well. We've got another meeting. They're going to send us off to another city. And they're like, have you heard of this city? And I was like, yeah, it's about 12 million people. Never heard of it before. Here's something I want to ask you while you're still on the screen and talking about China. America's Standard & Poor's S&P 500. Now, S&P is the top 500 companies by market cap. Alone make $1 trillion a year in revenue in China. The Euro Stock 600 earns 500 billion from China, since their revenue is half of that of the U.S. Add in all the thousands of big and small American, European countries, the aggregate will easily be more than 2 trillion. Here's the math. China accounts for 7.6% of the revenue of the S&P. The S&P's revenue is 55% of the United States GDP. That's 55% of 25.5 trillion equals $14 trillion. There's no way in hell America is going to be coming out of this one hurt or not hurt. Looking at that from a financial part where you're more in depth, you can give us a little bit more in depth look on that. What are your thoughts on those numbers?
Yeah, I mean, Alex, I mean, you are the stock market guru. I mean, you have a tremendous amount of trading experience, and you understand that. But again, it just goes back to the point I made of simply when you look at the economics and you look at how connected our businesses are. I mean, we can't forget it was never China that said you need to come here and manufacture your products here. It's never been China in a forceful way at all. It's always from the opposite side. It's always United States CEOs and businessmen who are seeking out, better opportunities to maximize their revenue. And how do we do that? Well, we go to China where we can manufacture high quality products and that we can, get it at a reasonable price. The interesting thing is that has even changed a lot. I mean, China is not a cheap manufacturer anymore, and it very much has pivoted. And this is something that I also recently visited. I was visiting a clothing manufacturer, a textile manufacturer, who is I have a full video coming out. It's quite fascinating because, they have a very different type of factory. They have 300 workers there, and they've actually, worked with a tremendous amount of European clothing makers. And their whole thing is we're going less quantity and more quality. So, this is the style that we're going for because our costs are going up, right? I mean, we pay our workers well. We have all of this social security, insurance, all of these benefits that we're now providing that, back in the 70s and 80s would have not been provided. And everything's becoming more regulated. Everything is becoming more structured. So it's not even that China is the cheapest manufacturer anymore. You can certainly go somewhere else to find cheaper manufacturing, but it is the what's vital for China's success as well, and why it's so difficult is the logistics, the pipelines, is just being able to work so efficiently. And it's really, that is what China has mastered. That's why a country like India, I think, has a very difficult time, replacing them. We're seeing that, Apple's going to move out of China. They're going to move all their manufacturing to India. No chance. There's no way they're going to do that. Now, they might move some, but they cannot move their entire supply chains over, just because, India doesn't have the infrastructure. They can't handle the quantity that China can with such ease. And there's no country in the world that can compare to China in that regard. But again, I mean, this is one of the very first videos I made maybe 3 years ago, Alex, when you and I just first met, was talking about, the Dow 30 and just how all of these companies are so interconnected. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to really figure this out, but it just takes somebody that understands business and kind of economics a little bit better. And the evidence is very clear.
Well, I mean, Cyrus, life's got to really suck if you're an American person now and you're barely scraping getting by, and seeing your government, pump billions of dollars into this senseless conflict. I mean, here's
sorry. Go ahead. No, I was going to say, I mean, that is the sentiment that I see a lot here in America, is that, I mean, the Ukrainian flags are gone. I mean, people aren't waving the Ukraine flags anymore. People are very much, I mean, there was this big accounting error, right? The White House came out and said, we found like another $6.2 billion because of our cost evaluation. We did this and did that. So the struggle in America is very real. I mean, inflation is through the roof here. You have to be, I really feel for the people that are earning minimum wage and that are, working at a fast food joint for $15 an hour. I mean, that's just not going to pay for things here. And it's very difficult. And I think you're starting to see a lot of that amongst the American people of, look, we cannot just keep sending money to Ukraine. I mean, it's just not in the best interest of our country.
Well, thanks for that insight, Cyrus. I'm going to the Duran for this question here. Gentlemen, I mean, you saw at the end of the start video there, he was in the final clip there. I'm not going to go to Vilnius. I mean, he better get his ass there, because he's going to have to be putting his hand out for, the billions of dollars that he needs. I mean, the audacity of this guy and the way that he talks to these politicians, speaking with Patrick Lancaster 2 days ago, Patrick Lancaster talked to me and he says, you could not imagine, the death that is happening here right now, the scale of it, the proportion of it is just off the charts. I mean, this is a big day. They've been pumping up the 11th and 12th for a month now. You see even creepy, strange NATO videos online being pumped out in your suggested list. Come to Vilnius. It's going to be a great day, NATO. And it's crazy. And my concern is that, as Alex Christoforou said, they've paid a lot of money. They got nothing in return. This, spring, summer, winter, whatever you call it, offensive, has done nothing. Where are we going with this, guys? Because there has to be I'm anticipating a desperate move. I want to hear from both of you guys. Where on earth is this going to end? Is it going to end? Is it going to end bad? Your thoughts, please, gentlemen.
Well, can I just start by saying that there is absolutely no doubt at all that Zelensky is going to go to Vilnius. I mean, I think we can put aside any debate about this. In fact, just before we started this program, I was even reading somewhere that there's even the crowd being prepared and trained about who are going to greet Zelensky when he arrives. So he will definitely be going to Vilnius, and they will be there with all the photo shoots and all of this. For one thing, he doesn't like being in Kiev very much at the moment, and we've discussed this, Alex and I, in our various programs. He travels around quite a lot, so of course he's going to go. But of course he's going to go to Vilnius. He's not going to get very much for Ukraine, but for him personally, having the endorsement of the West, of the Western leaders, is important, especially as things begin to go increasingly bad on the battlefronts. Now, where this war is heading, that is a very complex matter. I still personally believe that at some point this autumn, we're going to see an attempt by the United States to try and reach out to the Russians and start some kind of negotiation process going. Because from the perspective of the United States, they don't want to see another debacle in Ukraine, a much more serious debacle, one with huge geopolitical implications, happen, especially not in an election year. So I think they will try to speak to the Russians. The problem is, are the Russians by now interested in speaking to them? And the problem is that the Russians are so frustrated by what they see as American inability to understand Russian concerns. And there is so little trust now that any kind of negotiation from this point onwards is going to be extremely difficult, if only because the Russians don't trust the Americans at all and don't trust any American proposals, but also because, of course, Putin has to consider his own public opinion in Russia, which is very, very inflamed by this war, and very much wants to see it brought to a successful conclusion, and will not want to see something that stops halfway. So that's my own take. Before I wanted to finish, going back to all your comments about economics and China, I just wanted to point out that last year, 2022, trade between the United States and China was at record levels. Mm-hmm. I believe it was $690 billion was the actual trade turnover, and the US deficit grew by 8%. So US dependence on China is actually increasing. It's increasing in trade terms as well as in all the other terms that people said. And that was why Janet Yellen went to Beijing, because she understands that very well. But that's me. That's what I wanted to say.
Let's go to Alex Christopher, or Cyrus, you want to pop in there, or you have anything? Okay.
No, just Alexander's spot on.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to what Alexander said with the U.S. trying to negotiate something with Russia, say in the autumn. Yeah, but the problem that we see when we analyze what the U.S. has been doing, especially the team of diplomats that they have in place over the last year and a half, is that you have people that are just not good at diplomacy. And you look at what they did with China, Blinken going there, and then Biden calling Xi Jinping a dictator, and then the whole balloon fiasco, months before that. And then Yellen goes there, and she doesn't even know how to properly greet the Chinese official. I mean, I think the people in place in the Biden White House are just not good at what they do. So, they may try something, but I worry about their actual ability to negotiate something. I mean, I don't know if they have the ability to negotiate something this complex with Russia, and I don't know if they have the ability to keep things from moving towards some disaster with China either. I mean, at the end of the day, we're dealing with people, and I think we have in the Biden White House, we have a lot of people that are just not capable of doing the job that they need to do. Where in China and in Russia, I think you have the reverse. I think you have a lot of very capable diplomats and professionals who know exactly what they're doing and what they need to do. So you have a big mismatch, and Europe is no better, by the way. So Joseph Borrell is no better. So yeah, I think Alexander's spot on. The U.S. is going to have to try to find an off-ramp. They're going to have to do it quickly because the election is gearing up. And they can't afford another Afghanistan debacle times 100 to hit Biden or the Democrat Party. But, can Blinken and Newland, Sullivan, Lloyd Austin, all of these people, can they really pull this off with Russia? And then you have Biden. Biden is a wild card. I mean, Axios came out with a profile on Biden, and they basically said that the guy's just a terror to be around. I mean, I don't know if you believe Axios is reporting or not, but Biden knows how to mess things up pretty good. He has quite a temper. He gets very emotional, and he says a lot of crazy stuff, and it ends up damaging the United States.
I think the problem with Biden is that he's just not mentally there. I mean, it's a tremendous weakling for the United States, and his daily gaffes that happen, and he's just doesn't have the mental capacity to serve in this role. I mean, it's the hardest job in the world to be the United States president, and it's just shocking.
And on the flip side, Cyrus, I 100% agree with you. But me and Alexander, we have this discussion all the time. He's so protected, though, and we always ask ourselves. I think Alexander, you said it a couple of days ago. When are they going to finally realize that this guy can't do the job? But for every mess up that he does, he's more and more protected. It's just a crazy situation.
Yeah, that was actually really interesting. I'll share an insight. I was walking down Shanghai and chatting with a lot of people and making vlogs for the channel, and it was one of the things that many people were very curious about when inevitably Chinese people come talk to you. Oh, where are you from? Oh, United States. What is with Biden? How is Biden the leader? It's almost the inevitable first question. Really, how did he become the leader? Do you support him? What's going on? And it's yeah, I know it's kind of tough right now. It just doesn't make us look good on the international stage. I mean, the United States has to have a good, we should have a good leader, and it's been tough. But I mean, we're looking at. I mean, it's going to be very interesting the next 15 months or so leading up to 2024. It's already starting this huge campaigning here in the United States. It's just going to be a mess.
Well, all of you guys have mentioned, he's incompatible, or he's not fit to sit as the president. But this could result in more. I think this could result in more problems. Even though the guy is not there, no one's. It's a ship sailing without a captain. I mean, you get Lindsey Graham into this. He'll beat the drums. It doesn't take long for him. Well, even though he's booed off every stage in America now, but I mean, you get him involved in this, and you get the neocons in, and there we go. Another thing I want to pose to you gentlemen here is, what if a mistake happens here? It's not going to take much. Something could happen in Belarus, very easy. Something could happen in Poland. Something could happen in Kaliningrad, that small Russian enclave just off the shores of the Baltic Sea. I mean, I'm saying that desperation is going to start to happen here in the next 30 days. Ammunition's almost out. Money's almost out. There has to be, I mean, is this where we're going with the nuclear power plant? Could this set it off? I feel that this is going to be, America never kind of goes out with a whimper on most of this stuff, unless it's Afghanistan, of course, but they usually go out and create a lot of havoc. And I feel there's going to be a lot of big bangs going on here, and something's going to trigger it. Can we speculate maybe something?
I don't want to speculate too far, but you're absolutely correct. That is the major, major danger. And of course, we have all kinds of, frankly, alarming people making what I consider to be insane proposals, like Michael Rubin, who is, not an inconsequential person, talking about giving Ukraine nuclear weapons. I mean, that kind of extreme sort of proposal, and yet it's being made, and instead of being uproar and people saying, this is a crazy idea, he's allowed to write it, and he's still in good standing with many people despite making those kind of proposals. So yes, it is a real danger. As I said, I still think overall that there will be some kind of pressure sometime around, say, September, October time, to start some kind of dialogue with the Russians. It will become clear that this is a long war, or at least if not a long war, a war that Ukraine is going to lose. You mentioned Zelensky. Can I just also say that internationally, outside the West, Zelensky is every bit as unpopular as he is popular in the West. He met Prime Minister Modi of India, and that went off incredibly badly. You only have to see the Indian readouts about the meeting. He failed completely with the Arab states. So the United States is isolated globally over the Ukraine issue. So that's also a source of tension and pressure. And the situation on the battlefields is going wrong. And there's worries about a possible recession. And the president is unpopular. And he's got the problem of Donald Trump perhaps being a rising force again. And of course, he's also got now potential challenges within his own party. So all kinds of problems are going to come together in the next few months. And with a weak president and a bad-tempered president, a president who has a tendency to choose escalation out of the choices that are put before him. He has even bragged in private, apparently, about the fact that he breaks red lines. The risk of something going wrong is very real. Something very badly going wrong is very real.
Could this latest agreeing on cluster ammunition cause issues? Could this be something that really escalates it a lot more?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that is another crossing of another red line, and a self-imposed American ethical, legal red line. But they've crossed it. And what we see is repeatedly, when it comes to decisions, they always escalate. They wouldn't send big artillery. They sent big artillery. They wouldn't send long-range missiles. They sent long-range missiles. They wouldn't send tanks. They've sent tanks. They're now going to provide cluster munitions. Before long, they'll be providing fighter jets. What is left above that? And that's the worry. I mean, for me, actually, you want me to talk about escalation. The biggest danger, the thing that I worry about, is not that we're going to have attacks on power stations, nuclear power plants, and things like that. It'll be that there'll be some sort of coalition at the willing cobbled together. Countries like Lithuania coming back to them, Poland, whatever, are going to send troops into Ukraine to try to create some kind of safe area in the west of the country. The Russians won't accept that. They've made it absolutely clear that they won't accept that. But you can already see there's some talk of this. Those troops coming from NATO countries are then attacked, They then turn to the United States. What does the president, what does the White House do? Does it come to the rescue of those people, or does it let them be defeated with all the enormous consequences that would have for the political position of the United States in Eastern Europe? And the risk is, faced with that choice, this president, this administration will send American troops in to try to rescue those Polish, Lithuanian troops that are there. That, I think, is the most plausible, dangerous escalation scenario. I'm not predicting it is going to happen, and let's pray that it doesn't. But if you wanted me to say what worries me about this situation, it is that.
Alex, I heard something on the news the other day. It went along the line of the entire Ukraine military is out of ammunition, but it's also out of men. Is that accurate, you think?
For me or Alexander?
For you, Alex.
Look, they still have a fighting force. They're still capable to fight. They're still capable to go on the offensive, though it's obviously limited. And they could, in the next month or two, they could surprise the Russians, maybe here or there, but it's not going to. I mean, these are small, pinpricks in the grand strategy of this conflict. It's not going to have an effect on the overall trajectory of the war. And I'm saying maybe right now, I thought that Ukraine by this time would have at least reached the first line of Russian defenses. They haven't even been able to do that. Yes, they can still, put men on the battlefield, absolutely. But the way they're going about this counteroffensive is they're being depleted very quickly. And a lot of analysts are saying, okay, this can last until winter. This can last until the beginning of 2024. I don't know if it can go for that long, given the strategy that Ukraine and the NATO commanders have chosen for Ukraine. It really does seem like they are fighting this war until the last Ukrainian. They really don't care about the soldiers' lives. That's the way it looks like from the outside looking in. Of course, once again, I don't know exactly what the details of the strategy are, but when I listened to Zelensky's interview on ABC News and I listened to the Washington Post article with CIA Director Burns, the overall plan in this big counteroffensive was for Ukraine to reach the Sea of Azov in about 5 days to a week's time, to move their artillery to the borders of Crimea, and then to threaten Crimea with missile strikes unless Putin capitulated. That was pretty much the plan that all of these military commanders and generals and military experts and politicians came up with. That was the big counteroffensive. You read the statements from Zelensky and from Burns and the Washington Post detailing this plan, and maybe if this was a movie, maybe if this was cinema, yeah, sure, okay, it sounds great. This would make a really cool movie to watch, but in real life, this thing sounds ridiculous. Ridiculous, but that was the plan.
Wow, I mean. Well, I just want to once again thank all you guys for joining in today. Really, I appreciate your insight on, wherever and whatever part of this world is under geopolitical turmoil. I can't tell you how important the work that you guys do. I know you've heard it from me many times, but I'm going to say it again. It's extremely important for communities and people to understand really what's going on. The help of people like Patrick Lancaster, Earl Grey, I believe he's on Rumble now, and a lot of these other channels, Brian Berletic from the New Atlas, of course you, Cyrus Janssen, for your insight as well. These are really important times right now. Unfortunately, we can't get much of balanced information going on with the mainstream media. But again, if you're not familiar with these gentlemen's channels, they have 3 of them actually, or maybe more, I don't know. Alex Christoforou, Alexander Mercouris, Cyrus Janssen, of course, and of course the Duran and me, Alex Reporterfy, or I Chung Ching's channel. I just want to say thank you, and we'll quickly go around, and we'll go with Cyrus, back to Alexander Mercouris, and then over to you, Mr. Christoforou, and you can wind up the show. And if there's any last things that you guys would like to say.
Perfect. I just want to thank everybody for their time this morning. And again, when I tune into this, I also want to learn a lot. So I always learn from Alex and Alexander. Thank you guys for your insights. And I do have one final question I'd like to pose. I had a couple of people ask this to me. I mean, is there a situation where Russia loses this and Putin's gone? I mean, I wanted to tee that up. Some people had asked that question. Is that a possibility? Do you see that happening?
Well, very briefly, one can never exclude anything. I mean, there might be a crisis. There might be something that goes badly wrong. There might be a collapse in the military somewhere. There might be a political crisis in Moscow. There might be a crisis in the economy. With every week that passes, it is looking less likely. The period of maximum probability for something like that happening was the first 100 days of the conflict. The fact that it didn't happen during that very sensitive period when, there was the sanctions, there was the Western support for Ukraine, it makes it a diminishing prospect. But war is unpredictable. It could be, for example, that this offensive is repelled. Russia launches its own offensive. That goes catastrophically wrong in some ways. That's not impossible. The kind of thing happens in war. You can never exclude it, but neither should you calculate on the basis of it. And that's a mistake that some people are making. They're still saying to themselves, let's hold on a bit longer, and perhaps just maybe one of these things that we so desire, a collapse of the army, the Russian army, a major economic crisis in Russia, a quarrel between China and Russia, something of that kind might happen, and that will change the entire picture. You should never base policy on those kind of hopes, because they're most unlikely to be fulfilled, and becoming less so with every day.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I just say real quick, Alexander, Cyrus, that's the problem with this entire conflict, is the question that you just posed, Cyrus. To me, the whole conflict is and never was about Ukraine. It was always about regime changing Putin.
Yeah.
And the West needs to get over this. They need to just forget about this regime change of Putin. This is what led us to where we are.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights. I think a lot of you are probably going to, after you're done this live stream, get back out there and make another video. So thanks again. Everyone that's watching, in the description below, everyone's channels are there. And please subscribe to every single one of them. It's important to all of us. And share this video. And where else can we find you guys? Alex Christoforou and Alexander Mercouris. You guys are on Rockfin. Where else are you guys?
Alex has the list.
Yeah, you could find all our channels pretty much on all the video platforms. Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin, YouTube, and of course, Locals is our main central access point, the Duran.locals.com.
And did you guys recently add a Twitter channel to your
We're playing around with it. And we have Twitter Shorts, which I'm playing around with, which are just 1-minute clips of our videos. And it's maybe a week old, and I'm just kind of testing the waters, but nothing definitive yet.
Okay. Cyrus, where can we find you? You're doing very well on Twitter.
Well, I like to, I'm on Twitter quite a bit. But I would say YouTube and Twitter. That's the best places to find me.
I also want to tell my audience here that the Duran has been appearing on China's social networks. Someone's putting your videos up for you guys. And some of them are using translation. So sooner or later, you guys get on the Chinese platforms and voice your thoughts to 1.5 billion people as well. Anyway, gentlemen, I won't take too much of your time again. Thank you so much for joining today. Greatly appreciate it. Cyrus and I are always excited to come onto the program with you guys. We look forward to it. And you guys have yourself a great day. Thanks for watching. Take care, everyone. All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.